I've been involved in a lot of sequels where the story ended in the first movie and the studio would say, that movie was successful, let's make another movie. But this movie was designed as a piece of serial fiction. There was a sequel to be told, and the Wachowski brothers, they knew what they wanted. And I think that's part of their brilliance, that they could have seen the movie already in their heads and then just made it a reality.
As soon as they said yes, I was saying yes. And I really didn't have any reservations. I really just had hope and curiosity. And what are they gonna cook up, these crazy cats?
It's a much bigger movie than the first movie. The first movie just kind of set up the world and told us what happened, and it was about really Neo's character learning that he's the one and understanding it in an exciting, fresh action way. But this takes the story to a whole other level.
Our approach to the code this time is a lot more sort of visceral experience, that Larry and Andy wanted to make a point that the code was like the fabric of life in the Matrix, and that like a Powers of 10 type of movie, you could keep exponentially going into the details in any given object and see more and more and more. Try to make this macro universe via code statement.
又仲好啲嘅就係加強出型啦，就會好啲啦。同埋有乜嘢唔同咧？呢個同上集梗係絕對有啲唔同噶啦。即係起碼呢個我哋設計佢用電單車嘅頭盔嚟打，同埋我哋仲設計另外一種新嘅腳法喺後邊踢上去嘅，即係同上集冚唪唥都係有分別嘅。個頭盔打得都好有 power， 好勁嘅啫。
The whole idea of Trinity Falls is that it's like flying in your dreams, and that it has to have that quality, like there's no physical limits to how the camera moves, and in effect it is Neo's sort of subconscious or sort of view of events going on. So we're combining really ideas of the Matrix, and that it's like hyper real and things are glistening and ultimately crisp and slow, but also ideas about how to do a dream, how to make something look really, trippy, otherworldly, and all of that. The scene really has a blend of all different types of techniques. There's virtual backgrounds, virtual city. There's glistening CG glass. There are the bullet wakes and all of that stuff.
In the first film, they sort of came out as discs, and they just kind of hung out as discs. In this shot, and in all these shots where wakes occur, there's a kind of pulsing system where it's kind of like a wave that kind of like the discs pulse in and out.
The second film, I can speak about it from Neo's perspective, my perspective, is hectic. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of searching.
Story starts about 6 months after where we left off. The machine army is marching on the last human city, which is Zion. Morpheus, now having fulfilled this lifelong mission to find the one, finds himself, in terms of the war, in a role of a general.
Link is Tank and Dozer's brother, and he is a non-believer at the beginning of Reloaded. And, he's there to do a job. He made a promise to his brothers that he would, carry on the fight and be part of the fight and the whole thing. And so, and that's what he's there to do, his job. Really smart guy, really handy guy to have around. It takes him a little while to get used to Morpheus and Neo and everything that they're doing, because a lot of it is really unbelievable. I mean, he's been an operator for, on his own for 14 years, and now he's operating with Morpheus. And at some point, Morpheus asks him to believe or to trust. And he says, okay, I will. And from that point on, he trusts, and he's in the fight just like everybody else trying to save Zion.
I love the continual questioning for Neo of his journey and his purpose. I love where his character has grown and changed and is continuing to grow and change. And the love between Neo and Trinity, I think, is just, I was very happy to see that the brothers went with that.
The idea at the beginning of Reloaded was that you were in a threatening space. You've got all of the groups of captains are there, they're in the Matrix, but it's a space where you could expect agents to turn up at any moment. And so it was kind of scary.
That was like the first 2 days that we started in Australia. And we scheduled like that so we could really get a lot of the characters in, so they all sort of got to meet one another, knew how they'd interact with each other as well.
I was 9 months pregnant. I got this phone call like, listen, the Wachowski brothers are doing Matrix 2 and 3, and they, I heard that there might be a role in there for you. And I was like, sitting up here, 9 months pregnant, like, what? Are you serious? So that made me really happy. That made me really, really happy.
Mr. Smith, or Agent Smith, who I think at this point is really gone quite beyond the classification of agent. I think he's a Mr. at this point, is back, shall we say, with a vengeance. Morpheus moves from being this sort of religious zealot into being a fanatic, general kind of leader. In respect to the conflict that they have with the machines, Morpheus is the guy that you will follow because you feel safe with him.
Captain Bell is kind of a gutsy type guy who, if somebody needs to go that extra mile or somebody wants an okay to gamble, he'll give it to you, more than likely because he's a gambler himself. So I think he's a different type guy, but he's pretty stern to the point.
I mean, if Neo's in the world, he has to be in the world. So there are still the same imperatives operating. He's been liberated from the Matrix. He's no longer a slave. He's a free agent, if you like.
There were 3 agents in the first, the main agent being Smith, and the other 2 agents have gone by the wayside, and they sent out some upgraded models, 3. We are 2 of the 3.
We're more powerful.
More powerful.
We can,
stronger.
上一場佢打個 agent 係到 last ending 打嚟單手打，可以好輕鬆咁擋咗個 agent 啲拳腳嘅。呢集咧我就呢度咧呢 upgrade 翻，顧名思義 upgrade 翻，所以我想秉承翻上集單手擋，但係對方咧 upgrade 咗嘅，可以擋到佢 擋到Leo 嘅拳同揸到嘅拳，即係 Leo 咧原來都 upgrade 咗嘅，即係好快化解嗰啲拳腳，打開佢，同埋有啲利用有啲高難度腳法啦，即係捉住似旋轉踢點樣倒後踢嗰啲，加強咗佢嗰啲高難度嘅動作同埋新穎啲嘅動作，俾佢嚟表達呢場戲。
You know, they can even, on the set, we can change stuff, and the master will ping will come over and just change it, work it out so it really works well for the brothers, you know? So that's pretty cool.
The proliferation of Smith, I thought was a terrific idea. Basically, he has an expanded ego. I think that's the essential thing.
It's a very hero-esque, little Batman type of vibe, meant to be somewhat poetic.
So we see the mega city from high above. The brothers wanted the feeling of Los Angeles at night, but 10 times bigger, 10 times LA.
The character, for all of his becoming, from the end of the first one, from the man who could fly, certainly has a search going on, and it's one where the individual has left his room and his personal context, and has now come out to a greater context of his community. So I really feel like that is what he's learning in this second piece.
There was no point for anyone to be in there other than interactive informational exchange. So it was very centered on the graphics and the streaming graphics, and we decided to go with a color palette of black and grays. You know, that was Larry and Andy's contrast between, you know, the pristine possibilities of a virtual, you know, sort of thought process versus dealing with the dystopian breakdown of reality. A lot of Zion was Darrow conceptually based, and was some of the most dense detail environments that we had ever been presented with.
Because I wanted to draw stuff so you could see how it worked, and so that if they built it, it wasn't just impressions of things. I would actually draw the lock mechanism, and I tried to figure out how the pulleys would work, and they told me what they wanted. They said the action that would be involved, and so the actual docks themselves, I tried to make them look sort of like aircraft carriers. They've got sort of aircraft carrier shapes to them. They had like a railroad track around it, because I kept thinking of, you know, have you ever seen like a railroad junction where all the trains come in? And I put that crane on top of the elevator so that, you know, it's something that could move around and pick stuff up. And, you know, I was just trying to think of what they would, you know, what they would use it for.
Well, it's a dock area where all the hovercraft come into scene. It's kind of like a huge septic tank where it's been built into a landing base, where there's cranes and machinery and workshops for working on these hovercraft. And it's a defence area.
There's the scene where we come down this ramp and we're met by some soldiers who are going to take Morpheus off to meet Locke. And there's this huge sort of thing, and these feelers and these guns, and it's only like that much of the ship.
With the process of building these large objects like the dock and the bottomless pit, I thought it was really important to early on establish the relationship of those objects, the geography of those objects. for all of us, for Larry and Andy, for Jeff, for me. So I had Rupin build these models.
Well, basically, I'm taking Jeff Darrow's conceptual drawings and turning them into 3D working models that we can use to plan sets with in the art department, and then that can later be used as sort of a blueprint for the visual effects. And so what this is a three-dimensional model that's rendered in a hidden line format so that we can really see what the environment is without being distracted by textures and lighting. What you're looking at right now is just kind of a generic fly-through. It doesn't represent a specific shot of the film, but it gives an idea of what the space is.
The doc had hundreds of layers, before you even shot frame one. Every single zone had moving parts, elevators, cranes, people working on engines, moving engines, things like that. So it was an enormous, enormous environment build that never ended from the beginning to almost the end of the post-production time. They were always building, more elaborate details for new shots as they would present themselves.
Harry Lennox, who plays Commander Locke brilliantly, by the way, and I had a conversation. Do these two men know each other? Are they friends? Were they friends? We decided they were friends. And we figured out for ourselves that part of why they rub up against each other the wrong way is because one of them is pod-born and the other one isn't. And Morpheus, I think, sort of resents the fact that this guy wasn't born to be a battery. And I think with Locke that perhaps he resents Morpheus a bit because he will never be able to visit the Matrix. He will never be able to go inside the Matrix and see what that prison is like. And there is such a thing where people who haven't been to prison have a fascination with it, and that they'd like to go just to see what it's like.
Zion is a military installation. There are civilians that live there, but primarily it's a military installation. It's the last kind of bastion. So to some degree, even though this has become very decrepit now, it has a military base, And then you go down below the command level, which is buried in bedrock. You go down into the bottomless pit, which is where 250,000 people live.
Jason Locke is a man who thinks cognitively, but not necessarily spiritually. And I think, therefore, really is at variance with Morpheus. So I think that they represent two sides of the brain in a way. He and Morpheus butt heads from time to time for a number of reasons, but primarily they just have two ways of looking at the situation that Zion is facing. I think that a lot of what Morpheus believes is quite simply irrational. When I say that they're really flip sides of the same thing, I think sometimes Morpheus goes a little too far with the sort of esoteric thing, and that Locke goes a little too far in the rationale thing. So I think that between the two of them and other forces that are in this movie, everything sort of gets balanced out, and you get to see that you have to have faith, but you also have to look at things in a realistic manner.
Trinity has a whole nother level, which is Zion, which is just much more real. because, you know, on the neb it's more real, but at the same time it's still, you know, she's still in control. She's still in a position of leadership, so she has to be pretty straight. So that was lovely for me to have those 3 different layers to get to go into. My Zion scenes are about Neo and Trinity and their relationship and his struggle that he's having and her support of him in his struggle.
When you actually get to see Zion at first, you get to see sort of, you know, human ingenuity, you know, in the center of the earth and how they built up, you know, this world that exists and as many of the conveniences that they can have, they have there. And the set designers have taken a lot of time and energy in designing like this really specific place, like all these like handcrafted like little things, like chairs made out of like metal that, you know, like maybe they all put it together themselves, Link and Z, I don't know. But I really sort of loved it, and it was really great. Like they have the food growing, the mushrooms and this and that, and then we get to go in there and just sort of fill it with lives and stuff like that and just play with everything. And that stuff is great, but it's not an easy world by any stretch of the imagination. It's still a war-torn society. It's still a society that's fighting for survival, and but it's home. Performing his duties on the Neb, he is a soldier. He is there. He knows where his position is, what he's supposed to do, what his job is, and that's what it's about. When he gets to go home is when he gets to, like, be in love. And he gets to be in love with his wife and with his sister-in-law and the kids, and he actually gets to feel more. It doesn't have to be so stark.
She's very much in love with her husband and cares a lot about seeing that relationship be able to grow.
Initially, Jeff, Darrow and several other people did some illustrations for us, creating an image, something like a church or a big cathedral was the idea. Here, Larry and Andy wanted to have the feeling of totally the natural earth, like we're going almost kind of like back to the womb. There's a lot of styrofoam that's been used in it, so that it could be carved. Over the top of a lot of the styrofoam, we've either used urethane foam for its kind of organic growing kind of qualities. And behind me there's a big stalactite, combination of both, where they've literally by cup have poured small amounts of urethane on there to gradually grow and to create very naturalistic looking, what would be limestone pieces. The cave is probably half a mile long. Through the use of visual effects, John Gator and his team will increase the height of what we have built to 300 odd feet right in the center at its highest point.
We based some of those environments off of pictures we found in about massive underground cavernous, caves, and a lot of photographs of Bryce Canyon sort of rock formations and combination of, modeling and, heavy textural painting of those spaces.
The unleashable Lawrence, a wonderful actor. He has a lot of dimension. He's not just a contemporary actor. He's centuries old.
When I did the speech in Zion, I blew my voice out because I was playing to like 2,000 people. And I could not pretend that I wasn't. And I couldn't just play for the microphone, and I couldn't just play for the camera. You know, I'm an actor. I had an audience out there, man. I was gonna...
Oh, it was such an exciting experience to hear the words. You know, Lawrence, Morpheus, has the most incredible speeches in the film for me. Speeches that are so filled with just full on. To see Lawrence standing in front of those that thousand extras and delivering these lines that he is, you know, executing so beautifully and so powerfully, and people being moved by them.
The cool thing, man, was, you know, all those extras when they were outside dancing, all those beautiful young people who came with all this enthusiasm and these great open hearts and all their energy and spent all those days there dancing around in the dirt, dancing with each other. Giving of their energy. They gave me kind of an ovation that was just overwhelming. And, you know, I got to play those scenes with Jada.
I think Niobe loves Morpheus. I think she's with Locke because of his status, you know, and I think she's with Locke because he's smart. And I think after being with Morpheus, it's very difficult. She's attracted to that power, you know, that authority, you know, and I think for Niobe and her personality, she needs that.
And the super cool part about that particular space is the dancing scene, which involved, you know, the blue screen capture of many, many, many really hip, you know, young adults from the Oakland, San Francisco area. And we would bring them into the blue screen stage, you know, 5 or 10 at a time, and play this blaring electronic music, Juno Reactor, you know, stuff that Blair and Andy were dabbling with. It was like a dance contest of the funnest sort, and they would just do their thing, and we were able to get many, many captures, which GKR was able to layer into, you know, a 100,000 person, you know, tribal rave shot, and it's a 30-second shot that ends pretty close, and those are all essentially little movies of people on cards with extra dynamics of wave, you know, sort of push through them to make it look like they were jumping in large groups and stuff like that.
The people in Zion dance, and they're having ritual, and they're firing themselves up for the coming attack as the machines are digging down into Zion.
It's the center of the earth. It's hot and it's sweaty, and it's people in there who are struggling to survive, and they do. And you get to see that through the eyes of someone who loves it, who loves his home. And Link, being a natural-born person, really loves where he lives and loves his family and all that.
I loved in the first film when Marcus Chong's character talks about Zion being the only human city left at the core of the earth, and that's really all that you... I mean, you hear a little bit about Zion in the first movie, but so much of the second and third films are all about Zion and protecting that purity of that world.
There's something very feminine about Zion. I thought the set was just beautiful. You had these candles and just these beautiful warm colors, and it just felt right. It felt like a womb. That's what it felt like. It felt like one big womb.
The center of the earth is why they live here. It's warmer, it's home, it's not the coldness that exists between the core and the crust. It's a warm world, so I went with that. It's gold, warm, fire, lava. There are various obvious inspirations for it. But mainly it's the feeling of home. I mean, you want the home and the hearth. You want the fire.
Well, Zion is a place where, you know, they rely on steam-driven machinery, and we imagine that everything they grow by hydroponics because there's water and heat. So we had to create clothing that could have been made from hemp or made from natural fibers, vegetable fibers. So we went back, you know, into kind of ancient China and Mongolia and looked at mummies, a lot of the mummies that were buried in really beautifully woven natural fibers, like before the silks and stuff, and found shapes and textures that we thought were delicate and beautiful but raw, and we kind of tried to stay along that vein.
I was a bit worried about it and had fear around that area. And fighting was much more difficult, so it was good. And the brothers created a really beautiful scene. We care about each other a lot. We have a deep friendship and a deep respect for one another and a deep love for one another. So he's very easy to work with for me in that way because we've known each other for such a long time. And there's nothing but respect and love there.
The inhabitants of Zion live in these small little tubular houses that are basically burrowed into the side of these cave-like walls. And then there's this whole series, helix-like shape of catwalks. Here, Morpheus says goodnight to Zion.
You have Bane as a human fighting the good fight against the machines. And very early on, he encounters Smith. And in the early stages of shooting, I was a bit concerned as to how to portray him, whether it's Bane, whether it's Smith. And as soon as I walked on set, and the brother said, no Bane, he's gone. I kind of figured, okay, it all comes down to the level of playing how much Smith wants to expose himself and how much he wants to hide. So, yeah, it's sort of like finding different layers and levels in that respect.
Deb came up with this really cool idea in using Adobe After Effects for doing the veins growing over the body. We did make them grow in length and width over time, and we had to spend a lot of time sort of choreographing that to make it feel like the lines cruise over the body really fast and then spread out and disintegrate the skin.
This is what's just brilliant. They escape from these light bulbs, if you will, and to basically live almost in the same sort of environment, except in the reverse. Instead of projecting from a cylinder, they're living inside a cylinder. Although they're free, and that's an important part of it. And their memories are their own, and they choose their own destiny.
And so Larry and Andy were, I think, that was something they came up with, and it was a really nice kind of idea because there's an analogy. And even within the structure of the bottomless pit, there's a core, which is an elevator core. And then there are huge pipes that run down around that core. You get the kind of vibe that it's a kind of like DNA strand. And we always imagine down inside the power plant all the drainage that left the way Neo leaves when he's dragged out of the pod and down through and eventually picked up by the Nebuchadnezzar. He went down what was basically a big kind of DNA strand all the way down. So these things are really subtle, but they're there.
The engine room was, once again, the objective was to get that Darrow-esque vibe and to have the intricacy of the working machine parts to be so heavily detailed and almost convoluted in how much was really there.
Some of Gaeta's initial comments were that he wanted, Darrow detail, just insane amounts of detail. And the more detail that we found that we added, the more it seemed to work in that way.
The other thing is the real world is obviously very run down, dirty. It's built over and over and over again. So we were supposed to make these machines feel like some of them were broken, but then had been repaired and then broken again and repaired again. Everything's very greasy and rusty. There's a lot of hot reddish orange light coming from below.
This shot initially wasn't even planned. This was something that got added later in the game just by doing the sequence. The idea with these pools was that it's kind of the water treatment plant for the city. So the initial kind of water on top is dirty, and then it kind of goes through this process of being cleaned. And these multi-layered platforms are kind of, the idea is to get more cleansed.
They did a stupendous job really creating it on their own, based off the idea of what it was.
He has a human sensibility, and he's the head counselor, and he's, I think I'm the old wise man, he keeps looking for a way to, someone to have faith in, somewhere to place the faith. He sees in the boy, in the young man, in Keanu, the possibility of some final answer, the possibility of going forward, of not having to be at war all the time. So, but he still has a human sensibility, and that's rare nowadays in the Matrix.
The scenes that we share are all really touching and loving, and they're great. And that was a joy to do that kind of stuff because, not everybody in the movie gets to do that. A lot of people just, they have their line and they have what they're supposed to do, and that's it. And I actually get to explore some of my, my actor stuff. Just let it out. And it's real fun. And Nona is just great. She's beautiful. She's a great actress. She's just phenomenal.
A machine or a computer program has everything organized and a sequence of events very, very well developed. But when he becomes human, that filter isn't there. That system of control isn't there. It's like this white noise of humanity that he's enveloped in. And he actually has to stop himself going a bit crazy because of that. Pain tends to be a nice control.
They have taken the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that are told to us. So dealing with elders and youth, we have new characters. Clayton Watson, who's playing the kid, Messiah themes. controlling themes, governmental themes, cultural themes, the struggle for liberation, for truth, and male-female love, separation, divorce, all sorts of aspects, and also going from young to old, we can keep going. All sorts of these kinds of themes that we see all around us, and I think it's what makes this piece, if you do enjoy it, I think the reason is that it's basically a modern interpretation of these kind of classical ideas and motifs.
There are people like Seraph and the Oracle and Smith and Neo. There are people who have somewhat of an evolved state because they're a different form of consciousness in the Matrix, and so they're depicted in a different way. Their energy is completely different, particularly Seraph, and when we see him, he will have more like a opulescent gold white quality internally, and Neo senses that because he can perceive the sort of power or consciousness or energy of different people in the Matrix.
Ken 邊樣做得最好嘅，我哋度邊樣俾佢嚟配合到Colin 嗰招數，大家啲招數配合到咧，個點樣配合得好睇，我哋就點樣去，就其他都冇乜大分別嘅，我覺得分別唔係好大，同埋東方美國嗰啲分別唔好大，因為全部都係 martial art 動作嚟㗎嘛。嘅層次咧，我覺得應該有少少 level 嘅。大家拳來腳往啊，即係你腳嚟我腳化，我腳解你拳嚟我掌化，即係我讀個層次咧，大家有 level 嘅，即係唔會話即係高低分別到好大，即係大家都係咁高手嘅人嚟嘅。所以我讀個層次，大家高手如高手嗰種拳腳啊，嗰種惺惺相惜啊，即係嗰種感覺會有嘅嘛。
Like some really difficult moves, like triple kicks, or you get into like flips, and it's Keanu doing it instead of a stunt performer, which adds like an incredible realism to the fight as well.
Seraph is guardian of the Oracle. The character of Seraph doesn't change too much, very straight, and then very do everything is very polite and then very gentle. But when something happens, his movement is very quickly and then very clean.
What we do here, the real set is a couple of meters in length. And this is supposed to be an infinity hallway. So through the use of some of the research work on image-based rendering, we extend the background where Morpheus and Neo have their fight.
The park set had two functions. One was for a dialogue scene with the Oracle and Neo, and then it had to accommodate a large fight where there were going to be several hundred people, I suppose, at tops. So it had to be a big area, and we wanted it to feel like a kind of a New York tenement or a tenement somewhere around Chicago. And we looked at some locations. We wondered whether or not we could actually shoot it on locations and then shoot plates and have green screens. But as we looked at the kind of realities of doing that, we thought, no, it was best to try and build this set that enabled us to shoot 90% of the scene and actually own the background. Because we made it, what, a 3 or 4 story high set.
You'll always initially consider going to a location. But, if you're an experienced filmmaker and you know that you have a certain amount of money available to you, to shoot on location means lots of compromises more often than not. The Burley Brawl, for example, you would have weather issues. You would have lighting issues, maintaining a lighting plan over, 3 or 4 days so it always looked like it was in the same light. You'd have nowhere to put all the trusses that you needed to put all your wire shivs and your rigging points. So that went out the window pretty quickly. We also knew there was going to be like a lot of camera movement in the park, whether it be establishing all of the Hugos walking from different areas of the park. So it was pretty quickly decided also that we needed to build the whole Tenement Park square, if you like.
So it came about, like so many of the sets do, the geography was a kind of given. It needed to have this vibe, something that was run down, fairly kind of depressing, but at the sort of place where you wouldn't expect to see an agent. It's the sort of place where people once had lived and played, and kids grew up in the playground there and had a great time, and then kind of the world had moved on and just left this void. That was what I was trying to do, which was basically this geometric thing. And each building is almost a mirror. It's not quite a mirror. The two buildings opposite one another are mirrors of one another, which is kind of like that 1970s tenement building style. And then the others were kind of not exactly brownstones, but red brick tenement buildings of probably the 30s period.
It strikes me all the time just what a great platform their plot is, the nature of a reality and a alternate reality, and the stories that they tell. I mean, it's just a great launching point all the time.
They're able to bring together so-called high culture, so-called middle brow, so-called low culture in a composite art form. And this is in many ways exemplary of works to come. Those who are able to move from Homer to Curtis Mayfield to Elton John to cartoons to a number of different dimensions in our culture.
And they're not interested in telling simplistic kind of things. But they want to tell complicated things simply.
Well, one, I think they communicate on so many different levels. I think the benchmark of all great art is to be able to explore profound complexity, but to put it forward in a very clear and palpable language so that large numbers of people can understand it. So that, you got 400 different levels in the movie. Some people walk away with 2, some people walk away with 50, some people walk away with 400. So many different levels, dimensions, aspects to the film. And so I think by using certain architects, certain people can chime in right away.
The character himself is having visions, which involve the loss of Trinity. And he's told by the Oracle that, again, your choices will decide whether or not a person lives or dies, his loved one lives or dies, which he has to, he doesn't know if he can do. So there's things that he doesn't understand, and he goes through a lot.
Gloria was a woman who was, a giant in the American theater. I mean, she was somebody who was well loved and well respected, an incredible talent, somebody who never really got her due, if you will. And the role of the Oracle was one in which she was actually able to sort of live out some of that. Her death devastated everyone, Larry and Andy in particular, I know. I remember walking on set that day and watching her and Keanu There's something mystical about that scene. You know, I have to say that what's really lovely is that Gloria will be remembered. Her swan song will be in Reloaded, and she will be missed.
Because Smith has changed, because he's multiplied, because his ego has expanded, because he is free of he's not hotwired, he's not wired, he's not under someone else's control in a way. He's his own man, because he's expanded into himself, if you like. Then I wanted that to be reflected in his vocal quality. On the first Matrix, there was a certain sort of rigidity about the way in which he spoke, and a certain weight and a certain newsreaderly quality, or something slightly unearthly. And I didn't want to lose all of that, but I wanted to introduce something which was a little bit smoother, a little bit more fluid. And I guess I thought, well, there seemed to be a different tone in this, that he seemed to be a little bit more casual, because he knew that it was inevitable. That scene was building and building. We were coming closer and closer to that, and I was both excited about it and sort of approaching it with some trepidation.
Just to be asked the question, can you do it? You know, go ahead and train, and can you do it? It's just been one of the great joys of working on this piece.
So right now what we've got here is a motion control setup. It allows us to put multiple Smiths into the scene without having to use the computer graphics technology. So this rig is completely repeatable. Every time the camera goes past, we can get it to do the same move time and time again.
We'd put one Hugo there, film him, and then we'd take the camera back, and then we'd put another Hugo there and we'd film him again. So it looked initially like you would see everyone repeated was Hugo.
There were more movements in this one particular fight than there are in the whole of the first Matrix. It might actually be double.
In the Burly Brawl, you see Neo being more and more challenged so that he has to raise his level of skill to combat the opposite will. Smith, every afternoon for 9 weeks, me and 12 stuntmen on the floor went through a 5.5-minute routine. I believe I had over 500 moves.
Each Smith will attack Neo and perhaps lay 3 punches or 2 punches and a kick on Neo, and then be dispatched with.
At least half of the creativity in doing something like that is in planning the fight. So Larry and Andy and Wu Ping worked out the fight. I mean, Wu Ping choreographed it, ran it through Larry and Andy. They gave their additions to it. And then Wu Ping and his guys recorded themselves doing all the moves. And then I cut the fight together.
We auditioned about 50 guys, acrobats, gymnasts, martial art guys, regular stunt guys. Put them through about 4 months of training to mimic the actor Hugo Weaving, as well as learn the fight choreography and develop the skills they're going to need for this.
They slowly started to resemble me. They were all chosen. They all had sort of the right height, but some of them were a bit smaller. So the smaller ones started to have lifts put in their shoes. They started to get a bit taller. Then they all had their haircuts, so they were all walking around bald or with strange mohawks for a while. And then the suits started coming in, the ties, and we were all looking the same. And then everyone had a wig which was put on, and then the glasses. So eventually, in time, by the time we came to shoot, yeah, there were 13 sort of semi-me's running around. They needed to learn to move in the way that I do, and to have a sort of Smithian quality about them. So yeah, there were Smith lessons where I'd watch them run and I'd watch them walk, and then so I kind of gave them a few pointers, but it wasn't more than a couple of lessons really.
John came to us with storyboards for the Burly Brawl concept at the time, and goes through it with us and says, look, so we've got these shots in Matrix Reloaded that are going to have Keanu doing Kung Fu against Agent Smith. And John goes, so yeah, there's a couple of them. Well, maybe more than a couple, 5, 6, 7. So we start going, well, I guess we'll have to like shoot, lock off the camera and shoot multiple passes or use motion control. And he goes, no, you're not quite getting it. It's more than 6 or 7. It's kind of 100, maybe 200, maybe 300 in one shot. Oh, okay. Huh. And then he says, yeah, and kind of bullet time as well.
There are certain parts of the sequences that we had to create that we had to map Keanu's face or Hugo's face, and we had to do things with their bodies and their look that are not real.
So the challenge was, how do you generate synthetic humans? And we thought the hardest thing would be generating a human face that had the right expressions. So we built a system that we use multiple high-def cameras, use them to shoot an actor, and then we can reconstruct that actor's facial performance. Every little muscle movement, every mouth movement, eye movement, teeth movement, all of that can be reconstructed so that we can then fly around that with a virtual camera. So we can then stick that onto a live person's body or onto a synthetic body.
The problem with working on actual humans is they're so recognizable. You look at humans every day, you're very unforgiving when you see CG hair or a CG face or any of those things.
It would take an animator who was basically the Picasso of his time to actually freehand a performance like that.
We came in and we took 2,000 stills of the set as the initial pass to help us digitize every little thing from every window to every tree to the playground set. It's pretty much the only way to capture something as lush and detailed as Owen's set.
And we were able to use those same photographs with all the same painting and texture and detail and variation that Owen had put in there, bring it into the digital world, create these completely virtual camera moves that you never even think that wasn't real, because it was sourced from the real set.
We're so accustomed to seeing fights made editorially, where you see a cut to a guy throw a punch and cut to a reaction and cut back to a wide shot and over the shoulder beat. It's all done through the editorial process, and these sequences are not done that way. There are no cuts. The camera is showing you what it wants you to see while it keeps on moving, and it's just a whole new way of seeing something occur.
At the end of the fight, we decided to make it seem as if there was one Smith at the end who was separated in the middle of of many, many Smiths, so that you still got the sense that there was a major Smith who was more important than others.
Actually, in that fight, my character has no resolution, cannot conquer the opposite will, because in that moment there is no understanding of that, of how to do it physically. So he escapes.
Locke's job is he's the commander of the armed forces, and I think he obviously takes that very seriously. I don't think he's been in this job for a very long time, and he is certainly answerable to other, to higher authorities. I think he wants to do a good job. He has a deep, abiding, and very sincere concern for the people of Zion. And he means this, but he is a rational man, perhaps to his detriment. He can only think rationally. I think he's quite a good strategist, and he always has plans A and B and C, and he's always got that sorted out. So that's the type of guy that you need in a situation of war, and I think he's the right man for the job.
I was so honored when he said my own writings had been influential to some degree in the narrative that they put forward, the story that they were telling. I said, my God, you got to be kidding. These brothers reading my own work, that's quite an honor, quite a tribute to me. And when I received a call and saying that he had actually, they both had actually written a character, Counselor West, and asked me to act, I said, well, you know, I have no acting experience, but I would be blessed to come on the set and try to give some life to this character that they've written about.
That was basically after the scene that's in the video game where he basically tells her that he actually made it so that she wouldn't be chosen to go on this mission. And she's like, what are you talking about? How could you? I'm a soldier before I'm your woman, before anything. So that's basically the break-off point.
This is the Lavrai restaurant foyer that we're standing in, and this is meant to say something about the Merovingian. So the brief here was to be quite, you know, modern, hard-edged, that kind of thing. Then they get into a lift, which is really our lift, or elevator, I should say, and they come out here in this foyer.
The Merovingian is a very, very old program. He's one of the oldest and meanest programs in the Matrix. The story has it that the Merovingian kings, descending from a king called Merové, hence the name, are descendants of Christ. The blood of Christ was in fact his lineage, his child, carried by Mary Magdalene, who came to France. So it makes the Merovingian somebody going back very far in history, and also who would have a sensation that he is descending from the highest possible royalty. It gives him all power. It makes him very superior. Obviously, they needed a French actor to do that part because the Merovingian has tried every language, and he has chosen French as his favorite language. It's slightly embarrassing because I've worked so many years, you know, trying to get rid of my French accent, and then finally, you know, presenting myself to the world with the Merovingian, I have to put on the French accent, and it's something that I find quite embarrassing. Basically, he is a personification of all forms of indulgence. And he's really sort of one of the kings of the underworld. And he loves to play games. He is so much inside the system. He has understood the system completely, and he's like a prey animal with toys. He likes to play a lot. So that's what I have to portray. The Merovingian, as I understand it, is Morpheus's counterpoint. He is, as Smith is Neo's opposite, the Merovingian is Morpheus's opposite. He's not responsible to anyone. He does what he wants, when he wants to, how he wants to. And he really enjoys it. He has a philosophy, causality, and basically that is the philosophy of the entire machine world, of the entire matrix. But what he lacks and what he likes to indulge in is emotion. He goes all the way. He tries to feed on that, and he wants to provoke that artificially in other people. They are, this couple, they are like vampires in a way, but because they are bored, because they are eternal, and so they are very near the human nature in a way, but they need to feed on it, and he loves to feed on pure feeling. Once he has mastered the entire system, he knows how it's all happening, and so what he craves is the result of causality, which is, as he says in the scene, which is the sensation.
The scene in the Livray restaurant where code is actually used to demonstrate energy, not just form, but energy inside the body. And so this woman is basically sent a piece of cake, which is, so somewhat like Alice in Wonderland. She takes it, it immediately affects her, and the energy basically brings her to an orgasm climax. And it's not to show this physiologically, but to show this somewhat emotionally.
Schopenhauer's pessimism, wrestling with whether there's meaning, whether there's purpose, whether there's mission in life. You see that work in this play. Morpheus, Neo, wrestling with the systems that be, trying to reduce them to nothing, trying to reduce them to meaninglessness and purposelessness. And then on the other hand, there's tremendous will, there's tremendous effort, resilience, stamina, sense of endurance, but always trying to make oneself through the decision one's make, as opposed to trying to look for some kind of external authority to tell you what to do.
To me, it is exactly like, the quest of the Holy Grail, Parsifal, those themes that have, for instance, interested Wagner with the Schopenhauer philosophy, except that the images are modern and the themes, what triggers the imagination, is modern. But basically it is the quest of a hero that has to, in a way, renounce happiness in order to save humanity. And that itself is a story that repeats itself forever.